bill to end the government shutdown.
In a short while, I will sign a bill to open our government for 3 weeks.
Democrats get what they demanded, talks without a wall.
Have I not been clear on a wall? Okay. No, I have been very clear on the wall.
No one should ever underestimate the speaker, as Donald Trump has learned.
Mr. Trump hints he may declare a national emergency to get what he wants.
I will use the powers afforded to me under the laws and the Constitution of the United States to address this emergency.
But after 35 days, what did President Trump gain? Plus, our brand new NBC News Wall Street Journal poll. What effect did the shutdown have on President Trump's approval ratings? And how do Americans feel about where the country is headed right now? My guest this morning, House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, House Democratic Caucus Chairman Hakeem Jeffries, and Republican Senator Marco Rubio. Also, the Russia investigation, a 7-count indictment of longtime Trump ally Roger Stone, details the most direct connection yet between the Trump campaign and WikiLeaks.
I will plead not guilty to these charges. I believe this is a politically motivated investigation.
Joining me for insight and analysis are NBC News senior correspondent Tom Brokaw, Yamiche Alcindor, White House correspondent for the PBS NewsHour, Hugh Hewitt, host on the Salem Radio Network, and NBC News White House correspondent Kristen Welker. Welcome to Sunday. It's Meet the Press.
From NBC News in Washington, the longest-running show in television history, this is Meet the Press with Chuck Todd.
Good Sunday morning. President Trump now knows who the real leader of the Democratic Party is right now, and he can't say Nancy Pelosi didn't warn him. Remember this.
Mr. President, please don't characterize the strength that I bring to this meeting as the leader of the House Democrats.
That was before she was officially Speaker. This week, the president learned all about that strength. First, when he backed down on giving the State of the Union address this Tuesday, and then again on Friday, when Mr. Trump gave Speaker Pelosi what she had demanded, a reopened government, talks, and no wall, at least for 3 weeks. That concession by President Trump came hours after Robert Mueller drew a clear line between the Trump campaign and WikiLeaks when he indicted Mr. Trump's longtime associate, Roger Stone, on 7 counts. It was, in short, a very bad week for the president. We have a brand new NBC News Wall Street Journal poll completed before Friday's events that indicates, despite the drawn-out shutdown, the president's base, though, has stuck with him. Mr. Trump's approval rating stands at 43%, with 54% disapproving. It's exactly where it was a month ago before the shutdown. Obviously, we know that other polls have shown a notable drop in that time. But our poll also found a notable drop in another category. The right direction, wrong track numbers. They are the worst of Mr. Trump's presidency, with just barely a quarter of the country, 28%, saying that we are headed in the right direction. And that's reflected in this word cloud of how people feel about the state of America right now, with words like wrong track, disappointed, and disaster dominating the responses. Again, all of this was before Friday's Stone news and the end of the shutdown that was widely seen now as pointless. So after 35 days of pain, frustration, and anger over that shutdown, what did the president get that he could not have gotten on day one?
I am very proud to announce today that we have reached a deal to end the shutdown.
President Trump spent 34 days insisting the government would stay closed until Congress approved billions of dollars for a border wall.
$5.7 billion for a physical barrier. $5.7 billion.
He's not negotiating with himself. He has said $5.7 billion.
On day 35, with his numbers sagging in some polls, air traffic control stalling, and some congressional Republicans in revolt, he backed down, at least for now.
President Trump in retreat.
Unmistakably, a surrender.
The president gave in.
No one should ever underestimate the speaker, as Donald Trump has learned.
And some conservative allies are calling the president a wimp, writing, Trump blinks.
He promised something for 18 months, and he lied about it.
It's clear Trump did not come out on top. I'm not going to spin it for you.
The president fired back. This was in no way a concession. If no deal is done, it's off to the races. That last reference, his threat to declare a national emergency if negotiators don't get a deal in 3 weeks.
Obviously, we're going to do the emergency because that's what it is. It's a national emergency.
And on Friday, Mr. Trump's longtime confidant, Roger Stone, was indicted and arrested, charged with 7 counts of lying to Congress, witness tampering, and obstruction.
I will plead not guilty to these charges. I will defeat them in court.
Stone's indictment reveals the most direct link yet between the Trump campaign and WikiLeaks, which distributed Democratic emails that Russian military intelligence stole from the DNC and the Clinton campaign. The indictment includes this notable sentence. After WikiLeaks released stolen DNC emails on July 22nd, a senior Trump campaign official was directed to contact Stone about any additional releases and what other damaging information Organization 1, WikiLeaks, had on the Clinton campaign.
How many people could direct a senior campaign official?
Stone then communicated with WikiLeaks through an intermediary. 5 days later,
Russia, if you're listening,
that same day, July 27th, Russian hackers tried for the first time to hack into servers in Clinton's personal campaign office. On October 4th, Stone told Steve Bannon, then the chief executive of Mr. Trump's campaign, that WikiLeaks had a serious security concern, but would release a load every week going forward. 3 days later, WikiLeaks began selectively releasing Clinton campaign chair John Podesta's emails.
the allegation that 2 campaign officials instructed me or inquired of me about WikiLeaks is false.
And joining me now is the House Republican leader, Congressman Kevin McCarthy of California. Congressman, welcome back to Meet the Press.
Well, Chuck, thanks for having me back.
All right, on day 1 of the shutdown, the president had a deal in front of him that was essentially a continuing resolutions for 3 weeks. No wall. That's the deal he agreed to on day 35. What was accomplished?
Well, nobody likes to go into a shutdown, but the one thing I would see, especially if you're looking at winners and losers, I don't know why someone would celebrate a status quo. I watched the president in every one of these meetings offer a reasonable solution. I watched then leader Pelosi spend a new historical time on the floor of the House, 8 hours talking about DACA. We don't have the DACA solution solved when we could have. We still have a problem at the border. We don't have that solved. And now we got 3 more weeks to go. I watched Speaker Pelosi sit there and would not negotiate with anything. So I give President Trump a lot of credit. He put the American people before politics. He said if you want to negotiate...
After 35 days.
No, he did.
For 35 days, though, what did he get?
Well, I'm not celebrating getting something because what people are celebrating, saying Speaker Pelosi is strong because she got status quo, that's not what the country wants. Country wants to find common ground. The president made 4 different offers. It was Speaker Pelosi who said I wouldn't talk about anything. So when you think about 35 days, we've got 35 days of Speaker Pelosi not negotiating. And the president finally said, this is too much. If you say you'll do something else, I'll open it up so the federal workers will be paid, and let's see where you'll go in 3 weeks.
Well, that was her stance. She'll negotiate after you open up the government.
No, her stance was not $1 for a wall. We're not going to do anything. That it's immoral. And I don't believe that's where her members are as well. Because if you listen to her own chair of agriculture, said give Trump the money. Her chairman of armed services says walls work. Even her number 2 says walls are not immoral. She is out of step with her own base.
In 3 weeks,
yes,
the president is unlikely to... I mean, do you really believe you're going to get a grand compromise that somehow Democrats will trade something temporary for something permanent? A permanent structure for temporary relief for some of these folks. Do you really believe that'll happen in 3 weeks?
Well, if Democrats have always in the past voted for some barrier, and now they're not going to because it's being offered by President Trump, that's politics. That means we'd still have a crisis at our border. If in 3 weeks they said before, if you open it up, then we'll negotiate, they won't, they're the ones causing the problem. They have changed the course of what they voted for in the past. Speaker Pelosi had voted for a wall and barrier. Schumer had voted for a wall and barrier. But now they will not, because it's President Trump. I think that's wrong.
The Gang of 8 bill, the infamous Gang of 8 bill that you guys in the House never brought to a vote, did have extra fencing in it. I believe it was 350 miles of extra fencing. Had $46 billion in border security. What's wrong with Gang of 8 being the beginning of the negotiations?
So, last year, I spent more than a month every single day in my office with Durbin, with Steny, with the chief of staff of the White House, and we tried to come together on an immigration bill. It's one of the hardest things ever to do. But when I see a crisis on the border, 500,000 people illegally enter our country, when we were the most liberal bringing in 1 million new people every year the way we should do it. I think this is an opportunity to not only solve a border crisis, but we've got kids here dealing with DACA. They're both big issues. Solve them right now.
Look, the only way to make it happen is if both sides are willing to buck their base.
Yeah.
Is the president actually willing to buck his base? He's never given an indication he is. He's threatening a national emergency.
That is not true. The president is the only one who has been reasonable in these negotiations. And Chuck, I've been in every single meeting, so I watched it. The president is the one who offered. This president is the one who at the State of the Union went further on immigration than I've heard from a President Clinton or even President Obama. So no, that is unfair. It was only the Democrats who would interject when the Secretary of Homeland tried to talk about the current crisis. They didn't want to hear it. They didn't want to negotiate. They said nothing. It was the president that offered 4 different plans, that moved further than I think this party has even looked.
Well, let me ask you this. I want to play something from you.
Please.
In November of 2016.
I always love when I get
I know you love this stuff. Because I think it's going to beg the question of what the heck took you guys so long. Take a listen.
And I put together the team, actually with the speaker and others, our staff, working on legislation now. So when we're sworn in, not waiting till when the president is sworn in, but at the very first week of January, how we are able to move the legislation needed to start building the wall.
At the end of the day, why should Democrats bail out your party that had 2 years to figure out a way forward here? You said you were going to have legislation ready to go in 2017. What happened?
We did. If you look at the appropriations, we are building the wall right now, a portion of it. We have to go further.
Then why did he shut down the government?
He did not shut down the government. Let's be very clear. We were in the House, in the majority. We moved a bill to the Senate. You know as well as everybody else in America, it takes 60 votes. Schumer is the one who said no. So you put it on
the DACA for the walls, the president backed away from.
No. We passed this at the end of last year. Money for the wall, more money because we're already building it. We put another $5 billion in there. The Senate had a different version, and Schumer said no, so it got shut down. Then what happened? The president stayed in Washington. The speaker then went to Hawaii. The president stayed there to negotiate. We brought meetings down. They said they wouldn't talk about anything. We got into a shutdown that lasted longer ever before. The president made 4 different offers that were reasonable.
Not until after he shut down the government.
He didn't shut it down.
He's the one that said he'd be proud to own it. Who else did it? He rejected the Senate bill to keep the government open.
No. The House had a bill. The Senate had a bill. Like every other piece of legislation, it takes 60 votes in the Senate. Republicans don't have 60 in the Senate. So I think it would only be fair, Chuck, to understand that if it takes 60 votes in the Senate, there's probably blame on both sides.
All right, let's talk about this. In 3 weeks.
Yes.
When I think you guys pass something that keeps the government open, I'm guessing you guys don't want to go through another government shutdown. A bunch of senators want to basically make it impossible to shut down the government, Senator Portman's got a bill, Senator Warner's got a bill, but all of them is basically never to cancel a paycheck again for a non-political appointee. Will you support something like that?
Yeah, but I'll go further. You want to know how you'll never have a shutdown again? Let's not pay the members of Congress and Senate.
That's the Mark Warner bill.
That's the
and
bill.
the White House.
That's
right?
the bill I would
all
put in.
All political staff.
That's the amendment I would offer. Because this only harms others. But think about this. The president offered 4 different reasonable attacks. The Speaker Pelosi, then leader, has the record for the longest speech on the floor, more than 8 hours. Yeah. Just 1 year ago, next month, about DACA. He took 2 issues that are a problem, and he wanted to solve it. Today, you're trying to celebrate and say, Speaker Pelosi is some type of winner in this? Yeah. No, that means status quo. That goes against everything we know and we want for America. We want to find common ground and solutions.
Very quickly, yes. You have not appointed all members of the House Intelligence Committee on the Republican side.
I will next week. Well,
some people think it's helping to delay the transcripts that could get sent to Mueller.
No, nothing of the sort. The reason why committees weren't already appointed, the Democrats were not organized. They waited till after the speaker race, which Republicans would never do, to give us the ratios. I have just now met...
Intel is always the same ratio, though, in fairness.
No, we had negotiations with the speaker changing. I just met with every single individual that I'm going to appoint on Friday, so it'll come out next week.
All right. Kevin McCarthy, Republican from California. Good to see you, sir. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Democrats have generally been careful not to taunt President Trump too much after the shutdown ended, but they are making sure the public knows that they got what they wanted.
We asked the president to open up government so we'd have time to have a debate on the best way to protect our border. Democrats are committed to border security, and we think we have some better ideas about how to do so that protect our border, honor our values, and are cost-effective.
And joining me now is Congressman Hakeem Jeffries of New York, a member of the Democratic leadership on the House side. Congressman, welcome to Meet the Press.
Good morning. Good to be here.
Okay. Government's open. President Trump caved. Democrats won this fight. You heard Kevin McCarthy say, I don't know what you won. You won status quo. So let me ask you this. In 3 weeks, how are we not in the same spot?
Well, I think it's important to understand that the legislative branch, at the end of the day, are stewards of managing public money. We can either manage that money efficiently or we can waste taxpayer dollars. We concluded that spending billions on a medieval border wall that would be ineffective would be a waste of taxpayer dollars. That's a 5th century solution to a 21st century problem. What we want to support over the next few weeks is 21st century border security. And so we're willing to invest in additional infrastructure, particularly as it relates to our legal ports of entry, which, as you know, Chuck, is the place where the majority of drugs come in. We're willing to invest in personnel. We're willing to invest in additional technology.
Do you think a fence is medieval?
Well, I think that from the standpoint of building a concrete barrier from sea to shining sea.
He took that off the table. Is that progress?
That's progress, and hopefully he'll stick to that position that he's taken. Now, in the past, we have supported, as you know, enhanced fencing, and I think that's something that's reasonable that should be on the table. But I don't want to get out ahead of the process because there's a process that has been put in place. We've appointed distinguished members of the Appropriations Committee, and as you know, Chuck, there are 3 types of members of Congress: Democrats, Republicans, and appropriators.
Right.
I think the appropriators can get this done.
Obviously, it's actually hearkening back to how we thought a bill was to become a law. There's a Senate bill, there's a House bill, and you see if you can come to a compromise. Let me ask you this. If that compromise is something that doesn't have a majority of Democrats, but has a good chunk of them in the House, it can get through the Senate, and that's what happens. Can you imagine Democrats in the House allowing a bill on the floor that a majority of Democrats didn't support, but could get through the Senate and to the president's signature?
Well, the only thing that I can imagine is making sure that there's a bill that comes to the floor that's evidence-based in terms of securing our borders. And I think that has been our perspective from the very beginning, along with the principle that shutdowns are not legitimate negotiating tactics when there's a public policy disagreement between 2 branches of government.
You just heard Kevin McCarthy come out and essentially endorse a bill that would eliminate the ability to do a shutdown that would non-political appointee government workers. And he basically said, you want to do it, make sure the legislative branch doesn't get paid. And I think that's the Mark Warner bill. Is that bipartisan compromise? Is this something we could see happen, at least the Never Have a Shutdown Act?
Well, Kevin McCarthy is a good man, but that seems to me to be a gimmick. The most important thing is making sure that we never hold hostage hardworking public servants.
Would you want to legislate that to make it so it can't be done anymore?
I think we should take a hard look at making sure that we don't pursue shutdowns as a means of trying to extract leverage, whether that's a Democratic president or Republican president.
Let me go back on what I was trying to get at. The Republicans infamously had something called the Hastert Rule that referred to the idea of the former Speaker of the House, who's got his own, that if a majority of the majority party didn't support a bill, they'd never put it on the floor. Do the Democrats, the new Democratic majority, have that same, is there going to be a version of an unofficial rule like that?
Well, we haven't taken that position. We have taken a position that we do want to work in a bipartisan way and want to do it in particular on behalf of our For the People agenda. We've said we're going to fight hard for lower health care costs, to increase pay for everyday Americans, strengthen the Affordable Care Act, protect people with pre-existing conditions, enact a real infrastructure plan. We want to do that in a bipartisan way. $1 trillion infrastructure plan. We think it'll create 16 million good-paying jobs. Republicans, Democrats, even the president has supported the notion that we've got to fix our broken infrastructure.
So you didn't quite answer the question. You haven't decided whether that will be a rule or not.
We have not had that discussion in caucus, but we have discussed proceeding in a strongly bipartisan way on issues of importance to the American people.
I want to have you see if you can respond to something that Speaker Pelosi said in response to the Roger Stone indictment. Take a listen. Or excuse me, let me put it up here on screen. She said, in the face of 37 indictments, the president continued actions to undermine the special counsel investigation, raised the questions, what does Putin have on the president politically, personally, or financially? She asked that question somewhat rhetorically. There's some Democrats that are anxious to begin an impeachment inquiry today. At what point do you think it's appropriate?
Well, it's certainly not appropriate right now. We do have a constitutional responsibility pursuant to Article 1 to serve as a check and balance on an out-of-control executive branch. We take that responsibility seriously. However, we're not going to over-investigate. We're not going to over-politicize. We're not going to overreach as it relates to that solemn constitutional responsibility. What we are going to do is make sure we focus on the issues of importance to the American people. That's why Elijah Cummings is having a hearing this week on how we can lower the high cost of prescription drugs. That's why Richie Neal, the chair of Ways and Means, is having a hearing this week on protecting people with pre-existing conditions.
Right, but I think Congressman Cummings is also starting an oversight investigation on security clearances that seem to have at least some connection to the Mueller probe.
Well, as I mentioned, we are going to take that responsibility seriously. I think the American people want to see checks and balances. We are a separate and co-equal branch of government. We don't work for Donald Trump. We work for the American people.
Let me ask you this. I'm going to put up a tweet of yours, and you've been referring to the president not as the president in your tweets. You refer to him as Individual One. Let me put up one here, for instance, from last week. For decades, Individual One made a living stiffing his workers and contractors, and now he's doing it to 800,000 federal employees and contractors. We must end reckless Trump shutdown and continue our fight for the people. You refer to him as Individual One. Obviously, it's something having to do with the Mueller probe. You called him the Grand Wizard. It seems you're a member of leadership. What's that line in your mind? Why should the president negotiate with you if you're going to name call him? I know he name calls. Why should he negotiate with you if you're going to name call him?
Well, listen, it's colorful language, and I think that the president is going to have to own his pattern of behavior that has taken place, not year after year, but decade after decade. I do believe that we do need to find a way together to move forward, Democrats and Republicans. And in fact, Chuck, as you know, I was able to work with the administration on criminal justice reform, Democrats, Republicans, progressives, conservatives, the left and the right. If we can do it on criminal justice reform, I think we can find a way to move forward.
Do you regret your language or no?
I don't regret the use of the language, but I do think we need to move forward. Listen, America is a great country. We've come a long way on the question of race. We still have a long way to go. At the end of the day, we're a nation of immigrants, some voluntary, others involuntary. I think it was Dr. King who said we all came on the same different ships, but we're in the same boat right now. I think that's the way to proceed.
All right. Hakeem Jeffries, new member of the House Democratic Leadership. Good to see you on the show, sir.
Good to see you, Chuck.
Coming on and sharing your views. When we come back, Mitch McConnell is fond of saying there's no education in the second kick of a mule. What about the third? What has President Trump learned after the first couple of kicks? The panel on that and the Stone indictment is next. Back now with the panel. Hugh Hewitt, host on the Salem Radio Network, White House correspondent for the PBS NewsHour, Yamiche Alcindor, Kristen Welker, NBC News White House correspondent, and NBC News special correspondent, senior correspondent, Tom Brokaw. You're special, too. And special, senior, all those.
I just didn't want to be the kind of, special. Isn't that special? I'm unqualified in terms of being senior.
That's fair enough. I always prefer Grand Poobah as the official title for you. I'm an old Flintstones kid. So anyway, let me put up these headlines. Some conservative news organizations. Trump lost the shutdown, says the American Conservative Daily Caller. Trump caves. National Review, Trump blinks. Eric Erickson writes this on Friday in USA Today. This is undoubtedly the weakest moment of President Trump's tenure in office. The president may be the commander-in-chief of the American military, but Nancy Pelosi now looks like the commander-in-chief of Donald Trump. All right, Hugh, you've been hearing from the base, I'm sure. How bad is this for the president?
Not that bad. This is very premature. Tom and I will remember that Joe Frazier won his first fight with Muhammad Ali and lost the next two. We will remember that they went 41 out of a scheduled 42 rounds. This is the first round of a 42-round fight, and I point out that the president's approval rating is now higher than Ronald Reagan's was at the same time in his presidency, and 40 points lower than George H.W. Bush's was at the time in the presidency from the Meet the Press poll. And I looked at your word cloud, and the Meet the Press word cloud said, sad, no compromise. What I heard from your two guests is that there's the potential to go big and solve not just DACA, but everything.
Kristen, though, you're at this White House. Is he ready to buck? He got so defensive Saturday morning. No, it's not a cave.
Right, and the White House is defiant. This was not a cave, but the reality is he knows that his base is not going to be happy unless he gets funding for the wall. And so if you talk to a lot of allies, they say, we don't see how this ends in any other way other than a national emergency, because he can't shut down the government. Again, here's the lesson, I think, for President Trump. He went into this fight without any strategy, without any plan. And so every day, essentially, the president, the White House, they were looking for an off-ramp and instead of trying to execute something that they'd already planned out very carefully. And I think they're right now huddling, trying to figure out how to do it differently, how to make better use of the bully pulpit, Chuck. He didn't really do that in this fight.
You'll recall, everybody that knew Trump for a long time said he actually enjoys not having a plan.
Right.
He goes into battle and plan B's damned. Tom Brokaw, a month ago we were asking the question, who's the leader of the Democratic Party? I want to put up some quotes here from people that weren't always so supportive of Nancy Pelosi becoming Speaker again. AOC, Speaker Pelosi doesn't mess around. Tim Ryan, who challenged her. She's definitely up to the task, and that her home state governor, Gavin Newsom, grateful for our champion in Washington, Speaker Pelosi. I think it's undoubted. The Democrats have a leader. It's Nancy Pelosi.
Well, the fact is that going into this last election, I've known her a long time. She's obviously a very smart woman. I wondered whether she was the best image for the Democratic Party. And a lot of people pushed back and said she really knows how to run things on the Hill. I think she demonstrated that this past week. You know, Donald Trump treated federal employees like poker chips. Only this time his father wasn't around to bail them out. And I think that hurt him more, by the way, than people realized. That was a whole crowd of people out there who were probably voted for him, a number of them. And suddenly they get what they do is get their job jerked out from under them. I spoke to a Midwestern senator who said, now it's creeped into agriculture because at this time of the year, the farmers are dealing with government agencies to plan for next year's crop. There was no one home to do all that. So the damage was really more systemic, I think, than a lot of people realize, Chuck.
You know, Yamiche, ironically, the one piece of agreement I'm getting from everybody this morning is I think they're going to eliminate the shutdown. I think the legislative momentum, the good news about getting nothing for 35 days might be that.
I mean, this is the longest shutdown in history, 35 days, and people were, I think, at a fever pitch. The fact that the airports were starting to really show signs of stress, I think, was just the beginning of what we would have seen. I was talking to a federal worker this weekend who said Monday, people might not have showed up to work. Thousands more people would have been like, I cannot do this anymore. I want to think about the fact that we talk about President Trump not having a plan. Let's think about what he did for 35 days. He had a primetime special. He went down to the border. He then was possibly disseminating all this misleading information about the fact that there were drugs pouring in, that our country was being invaded, and all of that stuff. The polls are showing that the president was the one being blamed because he was on video because of Chuck Schumer saying, "I will own the shutdown."
Is that the lesson here for the president? The bully pulpit for him is starting to no longer be useful?
Well, I think that's the question, right? I think part of their strategy, and you heard Leader McCarthy speak to this, they're going to try to pick off some Democrats. The White House can't name any. He named a few, and there's a lot of skepticism about that strategy actually working. But look, he didn't deliver that primetime address until halfway into the shutdown. So a lot of his allies say, look, if he had started off in the weeks beforehand really selling this, really trying to make his case, that would have helped. The question is going to be about semantics. With this potential compromise they're looking for, can they find a word or a phrase that allows him to declare victory on the wall and Democrats as well?
This isn't a one-story town. In the middle of this 3 weeks, Roger Stone happens Friday, Tom. Let me put up here. I mean, look, the people in and around the Trump campaign that have either pleaded guilty or been indicted, it's a who's who of people that have been around this president. Paul Manafort, Rick Gates, Roger Stone now, Michael Cohen, Michael Flynn, George Papadopoulos. That doesn't help your bully pulpit abilities either.
No, especially given his image whenever he goes on television. I've known him a long time. He's always been dealing in the kind of frenetic fringe of the Republican Party and making himself out to be more than he really is. I watched him the other day with his beret and his sunglasses on, and I thought, perfect person would be Marty Short to play him in some kind of a stage play.
Well, they got Steve Martin to do it on SNL last night, so his partner in crime there.
Right.
Yeah. But Roger Stone is one of these people that sometimes you think, did he insert himself into this hue? But then again, he knows stuff about Trump that nobody else does.
The Supreme Court often takes judicial notice of what's happening, and the Trump campaign was taking judicial notice of what Roger Stone was saying. That indictment, which I read on the air on my radio show because it broke when it came out, does not yet support but does not preclude real collusion. We have to find out who campaign official 1 and 2 is, what they said, and I think those people might be going to jail along with Roger Stone.
Well, and the campaign official... Boy, Rick Gates smells like one of them. Well, and he may be cooperating.
Absolutely. And I think it chips away at the White House, the president's argument that this doesn't touch him. Strewn throughout that indictment are references to the Trump campaign, although not a direct link to Russia. You're absolutely right.
All right. I want to pause this. On the other side, I want to talk about sort of broken politics, broken Washington. But when we come back, I'm going to be joined by a member of the Senate Intelligence Committee, Senator Marco Rubio of Florida.
Meet the Press is brought to you by Charles Schwab. Own your tomorrow.
Welcome back. President Trump is staking his reputation with his base on immigration. And he's hinting he could declare a national emergency if there's no deal for wall funding in 3 weeks. But if this week taught us anything, it's that the art of the deal president may need to adjust his expectations. The last time Congress was close to a bipartisan immigration deal was 2013. The so-called Gang of Eight tried and ultimately failed to get it done. Only 2 Republicans who were in that gang still remain in the Senate. Lindsey Graham, who said it would be the end of the Trump presidency if he does not get a wall built, and my next guest, Senator Marco Rubio of Florida. So, Senator, welcome back to Meet the Press, sir.
Thank you.
Well, we just went through 35 days, and the president signed a deal that was the same deal available to him on day 1, other than the end date of February 8th to February 15th. What did this shutdown accomplish?
Well, hopefully it teaches everyone that shutdowns are not good leverage in any negotiation. I think it's important to separate tactics from the policy aims here. There's some missed opportunities in all this. We could have had an extension of TPS, which is a huge issue for people here in Florida, the Haitian community. We could have had a 3-week extension for Nicaragua, a 3-year extension, I'm sorry, on that. We could have had people on DACA that could have had 3 years of certainty, and that would have allowed them, it's better than what they face right now, which is they're waiting for a court ruling and what the administration is going to do. And so hopefully over this next 3 weeks, some of those elements can become part of what we do. But most important of all, I truly believe that if the president can get strong border security that satisfies what he wants, it unlocks the opportunity to do other things on immigration that we need to do, like figure out something reasonable with the people that are not criminals, that have been here a long time. But we've got to unlock that. It begins with border security, and that's one of the reasons why I think it's so important that we figure out a way to get something done that he's satisfied with so we can move on to those other issues that he's personally expressed a willingness to be involved in.
In fairness to you guys, the Gang of Eight in 2013, you all emphasized that you had to lead with border security. Michael Bennet was very impassioned about this, by the way, during the week. But I want to put up here, the 2013 bill had this. It doubled the number of Border Patrol agents, 350 miles of new fencing, universal E-Verify system, new electronic visa tracking system. And the deal was the border security measures would go in immediately. The adjustments to immigration status for various groups would be phased in. I mean, didn't you guys have the model? Is this deal worth taking off the shelf and making some minor adjustments?
Well, I think there's elements of it that we can. What the problem was, it was all done in one big piece of legislation, and the more stuff you put in a bill, the more reason someone can find to be against it. I don't like the ag.
Some argue the other way, Senator. Make the bill bigger, and yes, okay, there'll be things you don't like, but that's the only way to get some things that you like.
Well, I mean, that was the theory that was pitched to me as opposed to why we needed to do one big comprehensive plan. So we did. And as you saw, it didn't work. And one of the arguments was the border security will never happen, but the legalization part will. So there's no doubt it's a tough issue. And a lot of people who kind of looked at it in 2013 and said, this is easy, we're going to do it this way, are now figuring out how difficult this is. But ultimately, we've got to deal with it. And I just truly believe that, as you said, what the president wants is but a fraction of what that bill in 2013 did on border security. And if we can get something done that satisfies it, I am confident that the president is prepared to move forward on a bunch of other parts of immigration reform that people didn't normally associate with him or his White House. But we got to do that part first.
You have said you're opposed to the national emergency option. In 3 weeks, though, I know you guys have no appetite on either side of the aisle for another shutdown. So if that's the only way to keep the government funded, he goes national emergency. How defiant are you on this option? Will you fight the president on this or not?
Yeah, I don't think it's a good idea. I think it would be a terrible idea. I hope he doesn't do it.
But would you fight him on it?
Either. Sure, because I think that it's important. Look, I don't think we'll have to fight because I'm not sure they'll end up doing that. I know it's an option they've looked at, but now you're at the mercy of a district court somewhere and ultimately an appellate court, so it really may not even withstand if you look at some of the other rulings we've seen. The other is the precedent that it sets. And it's just not a good precedent to set in terms of action. It doesn't mean that I don't want border security. I do. I just think that's the wrong way to achieve it. It doesn't provide certainty, and you could very well wind up in sort of a theatric victory at the front end and then not getting it done. I think the best way to do it is to have a law passed that funds border security so we know it's going to happen.
I want to turn to Venezuela here. And ask you, because first of all, you've been, it's interesting, New York Times calls you the ouster-in-chief today. But let me read you one part of this and get you to respond. The administration has given no indication of a clear plan to protect the United States Embassy and its personnel against possible retaliation. And while Mr. Rubio insists there are unspecified contingency options that he will not reveal, analysts say the Trump administration does not seem prepared with a plan B in case the leader there, Nicolas Maduro, defies the pressure and holds on to power and essentially fights. The United States obviously has decided to recognize Mr. Guaido as the interim president. Do you want this administration to use military power if necessary to back up Mr. Guaido?
Let me answer that in three parts. Number one is I'm not the ouster-in-chief or anything like it. First of all, the credit belongs to the Venezuelan people who have taken to the streets. This is their movement. This is about them, and they're the ones that are courageous and are facing the threat of imprisonment. Number two is the decider here is the president, who's never needed any convincing on Venezuela. Do I offer ideas? Sure. He's got a great team around him, but ultimately he has never needed convincing, and frankly, he has raised it with me, the issue of Venezuela, more than I've raised it with him. I haven't had to raise it with him. He cares about this. As far as these analysts saying that there's no plan B, how would they know? Why, we wouldn't, the government, the Trump administration is not going to publish a plan. Here's what we're going to do to keep our folks safe. I can tell you I've been in contact with the State Department and the people that are in charge of this, and they do have a plan, and they have several contingencies to plan on. And the most important of it is no harm should ever come to these diplomats. Mike Pompeo was very clear about it yesterday. If it does, there'll be severe consequences. As far as the military option, I don't know who's calling for that. I can only tell you this, and this applies to Venezuela anywhere in the world. The United States has always had the right to defend its national security and national interests with the use of force if necessary. I'm not saying that's what's going to happen here. I'm not specifying anything. That's not my decision to make.
Okay.
I'm telling you the preferred outcome here is that Maduro leaves and that in 30 or 45 days they call an election and they elect someone democratically and Venezuela returns to constitutional order. That's what I want.
I want to ask you one quick question on WikiLeaks, because you stood alone among your party in 2016. Let me play a clip for you from October of 2016 where you pledged never to use anything that came from WikiLeaks. Take a listen.
Well, I personally will not be talking about any revelations that come about solely as a result of WikiLeaks. Our intelligence officials, who are not partisan people, have told us this is the work of a foreign intelligence agency. What I would say to my Republican colleagues, some of whom may be disappointed by the position I've taken, is today it's them, tomorrow it could be us.
If you work with WikiLeaks, are you working against America?
Well, look, I don't know if everybody had the same idea that I did or had access to the same information I did when I said that. Suffice it to say, it should be clear by now, and I think should have been clear to people a long time ago, that WikiLeaks and others like that could have been tools of foreign intelligence used to divide America. And so I do believe that anyone who is cooperating with them, witting or unwittingly, is doing the work of a foreign intelligence agency to harm us. But I know what you're getting at with Roger and all so on and all that stuff. I can also tell you, and frankly, I mean this, in truth, not in the spirit of nastiness, the media was unwitting in this too, because the media reported breathlessly on a lot of the revelations that were leaked that we know were now the product of the work of Russian intelligence. And I think all of us need to be wiser when we see this thing or something hits your inbox or another reporter's inbox from a third-party source that we don't know who it is. We have to be careful that we are not doing the work of the Russians or some other intelligence agency that's trying to undermine us. We all need to be wiser about this moving forward.
Should it be a crime working with WikiLeaks?
Well, that's a good question. I think certainly if you're wittingly doing it, it should be considered as such. I mean, you're participating in the work of a foreign intelligence agency. But one of the keys that they do is they're unwitting. It's not like they have a sign at the front door that says, you know, we are an instrument of Russian intelligence, or we're being used by Russian intelligence for this purpose. But that's why I've supported the special prosecutor and the work they're doing. I think it's important for them to finish. We'll have all the facts before us, and then we can render judgment. I think it's a real big mistake, trust me, to jump to any conclusions until Mr. Mueller's work is done.
Senator Marco Rubio, Republican from Florida, thanks for coming on, sharing your views. Good to talk with you. When we come back, as the Democrats eye 2020, they're likely to find themselves forced to navigate big differences among their own voters. They're more divided than you might think. The three paths for Democratic candidates in 2020. That's next. Welcome back, Data Download Time. We're going to use our new poll to look at some divisions within the Democratic Party up ahead of the 2020 race that will explain how the primary breaks down. We have Democrats under 55 without a college degree. It's a diverse group. Democrats under 55 with a college degree, they're whiter and more upper middle class. And then you have the other third of the party, Democrats over 55. Think of them as the old guard. It actually loosely divides up a third, a third, a third. These groups have different views on border security and on Nancy Pelosi. But we're actually going to focus on what they're looking for in a presidential candidate. Our first group is evenly split on whether they want government to keep shaking things up and make major changes, or whether they want more competence and a steadier approach. In both of those other groups, majorities believe we need competence and a steadier approach more so than somebody to shake things up. This could shape the messages of shake-up candidates like Elizabeth Warren and experienced candidates like, say, Joe Biden. Look, there is one great unifier for the Democrats, however. They all dislike President Donald Trump, kind of like Republicans and Obama, if you recall that. We'll see if that's enough to keep the party from fracturing. When we come back, the entire country hasn't been this divided since the 60s. What might compromise look like then?
Coming up, Endgame, brought to you by Boeing, continuing our mission to connect, protect, explore, and inspire. Endgame, brought to you by Boeing, continuing our mission to connect, protect, explore, and inspire.
Back now with Endgame. We've done a lot of who wins, who loses. I think America just feels like we all lost here. Look at this word cloud. I want to put it up again. I had it at the beginning of the show. The state of America today. Wrong track, the biggest word. And I joked a little bit on Friday that if we've broken Michael Bennet, the mild-mannered Democratic senator from Colorado, then everybody in the United States Senate needs to ask themselves how they're conducting themselves. I got to play. Michael Bennet basically had his Samuel L. Jackson snakes on a plane moment on the floor of the U.S. Senate. Take a listen.
It had $46 billion in border security in it. 46! Not $5 billion for his rinky-dink wall he's talking about building?
Yamish.
I think that's such an incredible moment, but it also is an example of how people were feeling, I think, all over the country. There were so many stories of families really trying to cobble together their last pennies, and you had this increasing feeling that the people that were part of this administration, including billionaire cabinet members, they just didn't understand what was going on. Wilbur Ross's statements that he didn't understand why federal workers would be going to food pantries, I think really took the air out of a lot of people's lungs, because people thought there's been a growing gap between the rich and the poor in this country for a long time, but it was really on display in that moment. So I think him losing it on the Senate floor in that way was really a lot of Americans saying, we can't take this anymore.
And I think it speaks to the fact that no one wins in a government shutdown. Yes, everyone is saying the analysis is that the president caved and Pelosi showed how strong she was. That's the politics, but the American people don't feel that way. They're scratching their heads. They're wondering what all of this pain was for, and frankly, how it can be prevented. And that's why I do think it's significant that Leader McCarthy, Congressman Jeffries, did indicate this willingness to support legislation that would prevent this from ever happening again.
I really didn't think that you could widen the gap between the Beltway and the rest of the country anymore until this happened, and now it's completely gone. I mean, I told you earlier that I've talked to these Westerners who began by saying, like Trump, like his policies. Then they said, wish he would stop tweeting all the time. Last time I talked to him, he's a clown, I can't stand him, but it's still the policies that we believe in. But anywhere I go, Republican, Democrat, or Independent, why can't they talk to each other and find common ground? Every community in America finds a way to build a new school or to do something about downtown. But here, we can't do it because we breathe the same air, and it's toxic in its own way about what needs to be done and how seriously people take their very minute positions on something.
Yeah, sad, no compromise, again, that's in the word cloud. The next 33 weeks allow the opportunity to go big and solve this. Jared Kushner's leading it, and it is far more important to shut down the Maduro government than our government. And I think Donald Trump is leading there, and he is winning there because of Bolton and Pompeo going down to see Bolsonaro and Duque. That's going to happen. That's going to bring us together.
That is going to bring us together?
I think America
getting involved in a Latin American politics that has never gone well for the United States
because
in years past?
Russia is against that.
I understand
Trump is for that, and that will help. That will help a lot.
I think that because there's going to be this committee of bipartisan leaders on the Republican side, there aren't people that are from border states, but on the Democratic side, there are. What you're going to see is people trying to actually talk about facts and maybe try to get on the same page, because part of what that speech was about was this quote-unquote rinky-dink wall is what he calls it. I interviewed the mayor of McAllen, Texas, where the president went to have his example to say, this is where we need the wall. The mayor said, we don't need a wall. We have issues here, but I'm here to tell you that a wall is not going to solve them. So I think there's an issue here with people not understanding that facts aren't being agreed upon.
The problem is in Wyoming and in South Dakota, they think they need a wall, and in Texas and in Arizona, they don't.
I know.
Yeah, right?
And a lot of this we don't want to talk about, but the fact is, on the Republican side, a lot of people see the rise of an extraordinary important new constituency in American politics, Hispanics, who will come here and all be Democrats. Also, I hear when I push people a little harder, I don't know whether I want brown grandbabies. I mean, that's also a part of it. It's the intermarriage that is going on and the cultures that are conflicting with each other. I also happen to believe that the Hispanics should work harder at assimilation. That's one of the things I've been saying for a long time. That they ought not to be just codified in their communities, but make sure that all of their kids are learning to speak English and that they feel comfortable in the communities, and that's going to take outreach on both sides, frankly.
And Congressman Peter King, in a conversation that I had with him, spoke to sort of this remarkable moment in which we find ourselves, and he said what has to happen right now, both sides need to ignore the fringes, because you have the far right and the far left screaming, yelling the loudest, and to some extent preventing compromise.
There will be no compromise unless there is a long, strong, double-layered fence about 700 miles long. That is the minimum that is necessary, and in exchange for that, regularization for 10 million people, not just DACA, not just TPS, there is a big deal to be had, because the extremists should be condemned, the fringe should be ignored, and the base can get together.
I would just say that we also need to adjust what we think of as America. You're talking about assimilation. I grew up in Miami where people speak Spanish, but their kids speak English. Yeah. And the idea that we think of American can only speak English as if Spanish and other languages wasn't always part of America is some ways troubling.
We'll leave it there. As somebody who grew up on Que Paso, USA, 3 generations, all Spanish, Spanglish, and all English. That's all we have for today. Thank you for watching. We'll be back next week because if it's Sunday, it's Meet the Press.